Right now, inside a man's skull in Texas, a chip smaller than a quarter is doing something that sounds like science fiction. It's reading his thoughts, not metaphorically, literally. Nolan Arbaugh is paralyzed from the shoulders down, but he's scrolling Reddit, playing chess, and controlling a computer cursor, using nothing but his imagination. But here's what nobody's explaining. How? How does a piece of silicon translate the electrochemical chaos inside your brain into precise cursor movements on a screen? Today, we're going signal by signal, step by step, through the entire pipeline, from the moment a thought forms to the instant a cursor moves. No hype, no Elon worship, just the raw engineering of mind reading. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand something that 99.9% of people, including most tech journalists, have absolutely no clue about. Let's start with a number that should make your jaw drop. 1,024. That's how many electrodes are crammed into Neuralinks in one implant. 1,024 individual sensors, each one eavesdropping on the electrical conversations happening between your neurons. But here's what makes this insane from an engineering perspective. Those 1,024 electrodes are distributed across 64 threads. Ultra-thin, flexible threads that are each thinner than human hair. We're talking 23 microns. For reference, the average human hair is about 70 microns. These threads are roughly 1/3 that thickness. Why does thinness matter? Because your brain hates foreign objects. The moment you stick something rigid into brain tissue, inflammation kicks in. Scar tissue forms. Your neurons retreat. Within months, your fancy implant becomes about as useful as a brick. The thinner and more flexible the threads, the less your brain freaks out. That's not poetry. That's immunology. Now, where exactly do these threads go? This is crucial. The N1 implant is placed in a very specific region called the motor cortex. But not just anywhere in the motor cortex, the hand knob area. Yes, that's actually what neuroscientists call it. The hand knob. This little patch of neural tissue is where your brain plans and executes hand and finger movements. When you reach for a coffee cup, this area lights up. When you type on a keyboard, this area is orchestrating every keystroke. And here's the beautiful part. This area activates even when you're paralyzed. Nolan Arbaugh can't move his hands. The connection between his brain and his muscles is severed. But when he imagines moving his right hand to the left, the hand knob still fires. The intention is still there. The signal is still there. It just has nowhere to go. Until now, Neuralink essentially gives that stranded signal a new destination. But capturing that signal, that's where things get complicated. Let me introduce you to the quietest conversation in the known universe. When a neuron fires, when it sends an electrical impulse called an action potential, it generates a voltage change. How much voltage? Microvolts. Millionths of a volt. To put this in perspective, an AA battery produces 1.5 volts. A neuron produces something like 50 to 100 microvolts. That's roughly 0.00005 volts. Your brain's electrical whispers are so faint that detecting them requires some of the most sensitive amplifiers ever engineered. And you're not listening to one neuron. You're listening to dozens, maybe hundreds, all talking simultaneously, their voices overlapping in a chaotic electrical symphony. This is step one of the pipeline, detection. Each of those 1,024 electrodes is picking up the electrical activity of nearby neurons. Not just one neuron per electrode. Depending on placement, an electrode might hear from multiple neurons at once, or it might pick up the louder signals from neurons slightly farther away. It's like putting a microphone in a crowded restaurant. You hear the table next to you clearly, the table across the room as background murmur, and everything in between as varying levels of noise. Now here's where the engineering wizardry begins. You've got 1,024 electrodes, each sampling at 20,000 times per second. Let that sink in. 20,000 samples per second per electrode. Do the math. 1,024 electrodes times 20,000 samples per second equals roughly 20 million data points every single second. Convert that to data throughput, and you're looking at approximately 200 megabits per second of raw neural data. That's like streaming HD video from a chip inside someone's skull, continuously. Obviously, you can't wirelessly transmit 200 megabits per second from a device that's smaller than a coin, powered wirelessly, and needs to last all day. So what do? You compress, aggressively. This is step 2, on-chip processing. Before any data leaves the implant, the N1 chip does something clever. It doesn't send raw voltage readings. It extracts features. Think of it this way. If the raw data is a full 4K video, the chip is creating a summary, just the important frames, just the key moments. Specifically, The chip is looking for spikes. A spike is that action potential I mentioned earlier, the electrical impulse that represents a neuron actually firing. Between spikes, neurons are relatively quiet. That quiet time, mostly useless for decoding intent. So the chip runs spike detection algorithms in real time, identifying those moments when a neuron fires and largely ignoring the rest. This compression is brutal. Neuralink reports roughly 200x data reduction. That 200 megabits per second becomes about 1 megabit per second, totally manageable for wireless transmission. But here's the tricky part. How do you know which blips are real spikes and which are just noise? Welcome to the nightmare of spike sorting. Not every electrical blip is a neuron firing. You've got biological noise. You've got electronic interference. You've got multiple neurons whose signals overlap because they're all within range of the same electrode. The chip has to filter all of this in real time. First, amplification. Those microvolt signals get boosted to levels that the electronics can actually work with. Second, bandpass filtering. This removes frequencies that aren't relevant to neural spikes. Action potentials typically show up in a specific frequency range, roughly 300 to 3000 Hz. Everything outside that band, filtered out. Third, threshold detection. The algorithm looks for voltage deflections that exceed a certain amplitude. Too small? Probably noise. Big enough? Probably a spike. Fourth, and this is where machine learning enters the picture, spike sorting algorithms cluster similar spike shapes together. Different neurons have subtly different spike signatures, like electrical fingerprints. By sorting spikes into clusters, the system can track which neurons are firing, how often, and in what patterns. This is critical because cursor control isn't about whether a neuron fired. It's about which neurons fired, when, and in what combination. All right, let's pause and appreciate where we are in the pipeline. We started with a guy thinking about moving his hand. We're now at a compressed data stream containing sorted spikes from hundreds of neurons, transmitted wirelessly from inside his skull to an external computer. But we still don't have cursor movement. We have patterns of neural firing. How do you translate neuron patterns into move the cursor up and to the left? This is the decoder, and it's where the real magic happens. Here's something that might surprise you. Your brain doesn't have a move cursor left neuron. There's no single cell that fires when you want to go up versus down. Instead, movement intention is encoded in population activity, the combined firing patterns of many neurons simultaneously. Think of it like voting. Each neuron has a preferred direction, a direction of movement that makes it fire most enthusiastically. Some neurons prefer up left, some prefer down, some prefer diagonal. When you intend to move in a particular direction, the neurons whose preferred directions are similar to your intended direction fire more. The neurons whose preferred directions are opposite fire less. The decoder's job is to read these votes and compute the winning direction. This is called population vector decoding, and it's a concept that's been understood in neuroscience since the 1980s. Neuralink didn't invent this. They engineered a system that implements it wirelessly at scale inside a commercial device. But wait, how does the decoder learn which neural patterns correspond to which directions? Calibration. During calibration sessions, the patient is shown a target on screen. A dot appears in the upper right corner. The patient is told to imagine moving their hand toward that target. They can't actually move, but they imagine it, and their motor cortex lights up with a pattern corresponding to upper right. The decoder observes this. It records which neurons fired and how often. Then the target moves somewhere else. Lower left. The patient imagines that movement. Different pattern. Repeat this hundreds or thousands of times, and you build a mapping. Neural pattern A equals movement direction. Neural pattern B equals direction B. Machine learning algorithms, specifically various forms of regression and neural networks, learn this mapping. They find a mathematical relationship between firing rates and intended direction. Once trained, the decoder can take new patterns it's never seen before, and predict where the user wants to move the cursor. So let's run through the complete pipeline one more time, now that you have the full picture. Step 1. Nolan thinks, I want to move the cursor up. Step 2. His hand knob neurons fire in a specific pattern corresponding to that intended movement. These are microvolts, impossibly faint electrical whispers. Step 3. 1,024 electrodes detect these signals, sampling 20,000 times per second. Step 4. On-chip amplifiers boost the signals. Filters clean them up. Spike detection identifies the actual neural firings from background noise. Step 5. 200x compression. Only the important spike information survives. Step 6. Wireless transmission. The compressed data beams out of his skull to an external receiver. No wires through the skin. This, by the way, is a huge advancement over previous systems like BrainGate, which required literal cables coming out of the skull. Step 7. The decoder, running on an external computer, receives the spike patterns and consults its learned mapping. This pattern means up. Step 8. Cursor moves up. Total elapsed time from thought to cursor movement, milliseconds. It feels instantaneous. Now here's something that breaks most people's brains when they first hear it. This system adapts continuously. Remember those ultra-thin threads I mentioned at the beginning? Turns out, even 23-micron threads can shift over time. Brain tissue settles. Electrodes drift slightly. Some electrodes might pull back from the neurons they were monitoring. This actually happened with Nolan Arbaugh. Neuralink reported that some threads retracted, reducing the number of electrodes making good contact with neurons. Sounds like a disaster, right? But the system compensated. Algorithm adjustments extracted more information from the remaining electrodes. Performance was maintained, even recovered. This is what's called adaptive decoding. The decoder doesn't just learn once and stay fixed. It continuously recalibrates, adjusting for what's called neural drift. Your brain isn't static. Neurons change their firing properties over time. An electrode that clearly heard from neuron A on day 1 might hear more from neuron B by day 30. Without adaptive algorithms, the decoder would slowly become useless. With them, it stays in sync with the brain's ever-shifting electrical landscape. Let's zoom out for a second and appreciate what's genuinely new here versus what's established science. The concept of reading movement intention from motor cortex? Not new. Research groups have been doing this since at least the early 2000s. The BrainGate Consortium, led by researchers like Dr. Lee Hochberg at Brown University, demonstrated cursor control in paralyzed patients back in 2006. The idea of machine learning decoders translating neural patterns into commands? Established for decades. So what is Neuralink's actual contribution? Integration, miniaturization, wireless capability. BrainGate's system required wired connections passing through the skull. Patients had literal ports on their heads. They could only use the system in supervised research settings. Neuralink's N1 is fully implanted, fully wireless, powered by inductive charging like a wireless smartphone charger. Nolan uses it at home, unsupervised, all day long. That's not a minor improvement. That's the difference between a laboratory prototype and a potentially practical assistive device. Okay, so where's this all going? Right now, Nolan can move a cursor. He can click. He can type using on-screen keyboards. He's played Mario Kart. He's played Civilization. But the hardware is capable of much more than cursor control. With 1,024 electrodes, you could theoretically decode more complex intentions. Multiple simultaneous movement axes, grip force, fine finger movements. The challenge isn't the electrodes. It's the software. It's building decoders sophisticated enough to extract that complexity reliably. And here's the really mind-bending possibility. What if the electrodes could stimulate, not just record? The N1 hardware is theoretically capable of sending tiny electrical pulses back into the brain. This could enable sensory feedback, letting a paralyzed person feel the position of a robotic arm, for instance. We're not there yet. Neuralink hasn't demonstrated closed-loop sensory feedback in humans, but the architecture supports it. Let me leave you with something to think about. Everything I've described, the electrodes, the amplifiers, the spike sorting, the decoders, the wireless transmission, all of this happens continuously, seamlessly, in real time. Nolan doesn't think, activate spike detection algorithm. He doesn't consciously engage his hand knob neurons. He just thinks move, and the cursor moves. The technology disappears. What remains is pure intention translated into action. That's the real breakthrough. Not the chip, not the algorithms, but the fact that a human being who cannot move his limbs has recovered a form of agency, the ability to interact with the digital world directly through thought. 20 years ago, this was science fiction. 10 years ago, it was clunky laboratory experiments. Today, it's a guy playing chess in his living room. If your brain is now full of questions about the future of neural interfaces, and if you want to actually understand the science instead of just the hype, make sure you're subscribed. Next video, we're going even deeper, the ethics and risks nobody's talking about. What happens when these signals are stored? Who owns your neural data? And what are the failure modes that could genuinely harm patients? Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you in that video. Your brain and the computers that might someday read it will thank you.